All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Kabbalah and Coffee. It's great to see everybody here this morning, this daylight savings. Yeah? So that's where we're at, daylight savings morning.
They say it's not with an S, they say it's daylight saving time.
Daylight saving.
Yeah.
Good, not savings.
No,
That's like Kroger's, when it's called Kroger.
Or
Good.
Nordstrom's, it's Nordstrom.
Or Toco Hills when it's Toco Hill. Right?
Yeah.
It's Toco Hill.
The shopping center's Toco Hill, the neighborhood's Toco Hills.
Is that true?
Really good.
Yeah.
For sure?
I heard that on the radio, I thought it was interesting.
That is interesting. No, it's good to know what the real thing is. So it's daylight saving time.
Right.
It's good to see everybody. We are saving daylight, one daylight at a time. Okay, so let's jump in. Today we have, so the first thing I want to talk about is what's on many people's mind with the virus that's going around. And Judaism always teaches us that the power of good is exponentially greater than the power of the opposite of good. And so if we see something that's negative, something that's harmful, that has the ability to spread from one person to the other in such incredibly powerful ways, I think it's a powerful lesson about the ability that we have to, in a positive way, affect others. And one thing that Judaism and Kabbalah stresses is the ability that we have to influence without even being aware that we're influencing others. Just by being a good example, just by being a mensch, just by living a good and decent life, just by doing the right thing, we can have a tremendous impact on those around us. The Rabbi once told a story. So there's a there's a Chabad thing where during the summer, yeshiva students who, school's out, so they take off from their formal studies. So what do you do if you're a Chabad yeshiva student in the summer? You go out around the country, not to tour, but rather to spread Judaism and to teach and to find Jews in far-flung places of the country. A lot of Chabad houses, by the way, around the U.S. and around the world, started because of these summer excursions. 2 guys would go out, 4 guys would go out, kind of canvass the country, saying, who are the Jews in Idaho? Who are the Jews in Montana? Who's in, Arkansas? Who's on the ground? So at a fabrengen, at a gathering, this is decades ago, maybe in the 50s or the 60s, so the Rebbe said the following story. So 2 guys went out to some far-flung remote place in the country, and they spent a week looking for Jews where they were. If you meet a Jew, how's it going? Do you need anything? Do you need any books? Do you need any religious materials? How can we help? Whatever. They're looking. They didn't find, not even one Jew did they find. No one. And they thought after the week that they spent there that they had wasted their time. It was a trip that wasn't successful. They didn't meet anybody. So the Rebbe said, here's the rest of the story. There was a woman who was looking out her window. Now this woman this was an elderly woman who had come from the old country. But she lived in this far-flung remote part of the U.S. without any Jewish community nearby. And it had been many years since she had engaged in formal Jewish practice because she was so isolated from a Jewish community. One day, she's looking out her window and she sees 2 yeshiva students walking down the street. They didn't stop by the house. They didn't know she existed. She didn't know they were coming, but she sees these 2 yeshiva students dressed in traditional garb walking down the street. And immediately her Jewish heart, her neshama, her soul gets rekindled, gets inspired, and she makes a commitment right there and then to do something Jewish, to light Shabbat candles, whatever it was. And then she writes a letter to the Lubavitcher Rebbe saying thank you, because she could tell that they were Lubavitchers, Chabadniks, whatever, so she sent a letter saying thank you for sending your students because they inspired me. The point of the story is that this was a story that the Rebbe told, how it's possible to just walk down the street and not meet anybody and not think that you have influenced anybody, and yet you might have a transformative impact on someone else's life just by how you walk down the street. So if there's a positive lesson that we can take from all of this stuff that's going on, all of this very negative stuff that's going on, I think maybe a positive lesson can be the power of influence, and dare I say, debating, going viral, right? How ideas and how behaviors and how dispositions, moods, positivity can go viral. So if it's true in the power of the negative, in influences that can have a destructive impact on lives, it's certainly true in the positive. That you and I have the ability to positively impact others just by proximity. Not even intentionally, right? Disease is not spread, this is not spread intentionally. It's just by proximity. So we have the ability to affect others, to influence others positively, even by proximity, even unintentionally. It doesn't mean we shouldn't intentionally be a good role model and educate and teach and mentor and influence others. But what it means is even when we don't think we are, we are. Which, by the way, is not only a vote of confidence, but also gives us a responsibility to make sure that the way we are, the way we carry ourselves, is indeed spreading something positive as opposed to something negative. And that's a choice that we have in our own lives. Okay, so with that preamble out of the way, I want to jump back into our text. So we're up to chapter 12 of our text, which I've entitled Learning How to Love. The original is called Hecholzu. This is Learning How to Love, chapter number 12. Please take and pass. We're going to explore some pretty amazing ideas today, including the power of brokenness, which we'll get to soon. Please take. Good morning, Matt. All right, so last week we spoke extensively about the paradox of existence. How existence, on the one hand, exists, but on the other hand, shouldn't exist. It's like a ball that we throw in the air, that while there's a force that's overwhelming the force of gravity, it's flying in the air. But after that force has dissipated, when that force is no longer present in that item that's being thrown, so the item returns back to the ground and rests on the ground. The same thing we said is true with existence itself. The nature of existence is in reality non-existence. Because the prior state of this is not this. And therefore, so two things. Number one, this entire being, this entire notion of existence is a miracle, is miraculous. What's termed in Kabbalah, yesh me'ayin, something from nothing, which evokes the miraculous state of existence. You see, something from something is not a miracle. That's normal, that's usual. If I take a piece of paper, right, and I unfold it, take this brochure, and I unfold it, and I turn it into a paper airplane, so it wasn't, not that I would do that, but such a wonderful brochure about an upcoming course, but if I would turn this into a paper airplane, so the airplane didn't exist before, but the paper existed before, so I haven't created something from nothing, I've created something from something, and creating something from something is not really a miracle. It might be creative, it might be interesting, but it's not really creating from scratch. And therefore, the artist or the artisan doesn't need to be around once the item is reformed or refashioned. The source or the cause or the catalyst of that change doesn't need to be around to continue effecting that change. The change has happened and it exists. So I can create a painting and walk away. I can turn this into a paper airplane, throw it across the room, and I can walk out the room and it's still sitting there on the floor. I can take metal and reform it into something else. I can take clay and make something out of it. I can take wood and make furniture. I can create that beautiful table out of wood. It's a nice table over there, right? And you don't need the crafts person, you don't need the one who made it to be around holding up the table, assuming that they did a good job with the table, right? They can let it go and walk out the room, and it's still there. That's because you started off with something, and you're not really creating anything new. You've just refashioned it into something that's a little bit modified. And therefore, the person, the force that created the change, or that effected the change, doesn't need to be around. When it comes, however, to the creation of the universe, that's not taking some existing matter and refashioning it into something else. That's creating the very origins of matter itself. That's going from nothing to something. When I say nothing, of course there's God, but nothing, i.e. nothing of the created sauce, right? There's nothing of that existed before. So to go from nothing to something is a miracle, i.e. something that shouldn't have happened. It doesn't make sense that it happened. And for that to continue to happen requires a constant force to make sure that it continues to exist. Like I said about the ball that's thrown in the air, the ball is not, it's not like there's two types of baseballs. A normal baseball that sits on the ground and a flying baseball that flies through the air. Baseballs are baseballs, and gravity is gravity. When you overwhelm the force of gravity by lifting it up and throwing it into the air, so then you've overridden the natural law or the natural forces of the universe temporarily to create flight. But it requires, if you want to keep it in the air, you have to continue to have some sort of force that propels it. The same thing is true with the universe. The nature of the universe is non-existence. It's ayin, it's nothingness. So for it to be a yesh, a something, requires a constant force. So this exposes the paradox of creation, which is what we're going to read inside in a moment. The paradox being that on the one hand, creating something from nothing is a very distant form of creation, because it's not something that was close to happening. It's not like the wood and the table that are very close to each other. It's not like this paper and the airplane that are similar, or the metal that looks like this and the metal that looks like that. Again, similar, it's close to each other. Or even the evolution of emotions from ideas. So you think about something and you have a feeling about that same thing. You think about something that's wonderful, and then you feel like a joy and an excitement in your heart. So you start off with an idea or a thought, and it evolves into an emotion. Those two are different, but they're close to each other. That idea begets, begets, bagels.
B. Gates.
I'm kidding. Signed B. Gates. Is it beget or begets? Or is it savings or saving? That's the question. Kidding. So, yeah, so who knows what we're up to at this point? The point is like this. The emotion comes from the idea. The idea is close to the emotion. And it makes sense that this idea should give birth, should give rise to that emotion. And when you look at the emotion, you know where it came from. If you're excited about something, you're probably thinking about it, and you're probably thinking about it in a positive way. When it comes to creation of heaven and earth, there's nothing that precipitates that. There's nothing that is like, oh, I could have seen that coming. It's out of nowhere. Again, there's no source. It's not an evolutionary process to get to the creation of heaven and earth. Once you have the beginnings of heaven and earth, i.e. of the universe, then the evolutionary process kicks in to evolve into all of the created things that we have. That's a separate step. But the origins of the universe, as Kabbalah explains it, the origins are out of nowhere. It's interesting because science talks about different theories of the origins of the universe. But all the theories are predicated on something being there. Correct? Yes, science. The scientific theories all begin with something going on. Right? There's a Big Bang, but there was something going on that precipitates the Big Bang. Right? There's some sort of forces. So it's interesting. So how do you get those things? Unless you say they were always there, whatever. But the point is that in Kabbalah, the notion of origin, how does the origin begin? It begins from nothing to something. From abject nothingness to something. That's an infinite gap. From something to something might be a step, but it's a small step. Maybe, bigger, smaller, but it's a step. It's a progressive step. But to go from nothing to something is an infinite step. Infinite successive stages of nothingness will never get you something. Does that make sense? Infinite successive stages of nothingness will never get you something. No matter how long you walk in the realm of nothingness, you will never arrive at something. When it comes to evolution, right, things that evolve, the more you go, the more you'll get to the next step. That's the way it is, right? Progress is progress. It's progressive. You keep on walking, you're going to get something, you're going to make the next discovery. That's normal. But no matter how long you walk, you travel, you journey in ayin, in nothingness, you will never arrive at something because it's two completely different realities. So there's an unbridgeable gap, gulf, yawn, chasm between nothing and something. It's not close, it's infinitely distant. On the other hand, in order for something to be, the power of the source, which we're calling nothing, because it's nothing of this sort, just to clarify, make sure we're on the same page, it's not that Kabbalah says there's nothing beyond us. There's definitely something, but not this something. Not the created something, it's the divine something, which is not of this sort. But again, no matter how long you journey in that divine nothingness, you will never get something. There's a hard start to all of this. So on the one hand, there's an infinite gap and gulf between this and the beyond. On the other hand, in order for this to be, the source, i.e. God, that divine energy constantly has to be making this be. And not just from the outside in, but from the inside out. It's like for that baseball to soar in the air, it needs the force of that propulsion, whatever you want to call it. It needs that force inside of it, keeping it going. The universe, existence, this somethingness requires that divine force constantly. Divine force not of something, but from nothing. So again, the paradox is, on the one hand, there's an infinite gap. On the other hand, there is no gap. On the one hand, it's the greatest gap that could ever be conceived. On the other hand, there is no gap, because if there were any gap, this wouldn't be here. Which means that there's an infinitely distant force inside of every cell, molecule, and atom in the universe. That's the wild thing. There's a force that is infinitely beyond everything, inside everything. That's the paradox. It's beyond, yet within. So now, meditating on this is the purpose of chapter 12. When you think about this, and you really think about this, and you really get into it in your mind, it will produce an emotion of excitement and joy and longing to be connected with that source in a conscious way. Now, we're always connected with that source as long as we're alive, right? And even beyond this incarnation of life, as long as there is existence, there is that connection. But the desire is for that conscious connection, for that connection that we're aware of, not just that exists because it exists, but that we're actually aware of. So, let's jump now into chapter 12. We started chapter 12 a few weeks ago. Last week we spoke about these topics outside. Let's jump in, and the goal here is to then get into chapter 13, which is all about brokenness. Okay. So let's start. I want to go back a little bit because it's been a few weeks since we jumped inside. So let us start from. Let's start from the beginning. Let's just start from the beginning. We'll pick it up. We'll go through these topics. Okay, page 23, chapter 12. Here we go. It is well known that there are two approaches in Avada, in divine service. Divine service through joy, and number two, divine service through humility. In this chapter, we will discuss the first. Joy in Avada, in divine service, can be attained by understanding and meditating upon the greatness of God, which is manifest in the creation ex nihilo. Ex nihilo is Latin for something from nothing. Ex is something, nihilo is from nothing. That's my rough translation of Latin. I only know because it's translating the Hebrew. So I'm assuming that that's what it is. Okay. Yesh me'ayin, something from nothing. So here we have a paradox. In the first place, the creation of something from nothing is a wondrous thing that man, i.e. human beings, cannot even truly imagine. Again, we can't imagine what the absence of something truly means. We exist in a realm of some things. And even when we try to imagine nothingness, the nothingness that we try to imagine is imprinted by the somethingness that we know, or somethingnesses that we know, or by the things that we know. So again, picture nothing, picture emptiness, and you're picturing something that appears empty, but it's still something, right? Our minds can't go to a place beyond something, because it originates from the place of something. You can't go past your source. You just can't. Okay. Moreover, creation of something from nothing is not the same as the relation between cause and effect. When we say cause and effect in Hasidic writings called Ila va'ol, we understand that the cause is enclosed in the effect, and the effect is conscious of the cause. That's the evolutionary process that we spoke about before. In other words, let's say ideas or thoughts and feelings. So we think about something, we develop a feeling. So the cause, the thought, is enclosed in the effect, which is the feeling. And the effect, the feeling, is aware, is conscious of the cause, i.e. the thought. There is thus a basic relationship between the two. By contrast, in the case of creation of something from nothing, as I mentioned before, there is an unbridgeable gulf between the source, the creator, and the result, the object created. Again, no amount of traversing that realm of nothingness will land you in the realm of something. It's not going to happen. It's like, again, using a silly example, no matter how long I think about a Ferrari, I will not produce one through the power of my mind, through the power of my thoughts. I might produce emotions, right? That's something else, but I won't actually produce the vehicle. It's not going to happen. So that's a poor example, because still I can conjure up something that's of a similar sort, and I can, through my ideas, I can then affect the creation of it, whatever, theoretically, right? But this is an even greater gulf. But I'm just giving you an example. No matter how, there is no relation, there is no connection between nothing and something. Unbridgeable gulf. The divine creative force, back inside, the divine creative force is hidden and is not enclosed in the creature as in the case of cause and effect. In other words, It's an unbridgeable gap. Paradoxically, however, the divine creative force must be constantly present within the created thing. We just said that it's not enclosed in it, doesn't mean that it's not present. Enclosed means that it's there in a conscious way that's felt, recognized, and obvious. It's not that, but it is present because it has to be present, as I said before, otherwise this whole thing wouldn't exist. Without it would return, page 24, to a state of nothingness. Again, without the creative divine force in everything, in every atom of existence would not be. For material existence is something new. Before creation, the physical did not exist. Hence, its existence is maintained only when the creative force which gives it existence is present. For any new entity must constantly be revitalized by the force which brought it into being. Again, using the example of the baseball. The flying baseball is a new entity which is only powered as long as it's being powered. Or, like another example that I gave last week, and I've given the example countless times, is a room that's light. The only way the room is light is as long as the light is emanating from the source of light. The moment the light goes out, everything reverts to a state of darkness in the room. Again, assuming there weren't windows here, if this was a totally closed space, and you would shut the lights, the room would go dark. Because there is, in a sense, an unbridgeable gap between the light and the substance in the room. If you want to overwhelm the natural state of the room, you have to have that light shining. So the reality of a light room only happens when the light is constantly being reanimated or projected into the room. So the same thing is true with creation, with existence. In order for the universe to exist, it requires a constant revitalization and re-energizing from the source. If not, the new entity will return to its original state of nothingness and cease to exist. So here's the paradox. On the one hand, source and universe have nothing in common. Unbridgeable gap. Infinitely distant from each other. On the other hand, source is radically present inside the created universe. And if it wasn't, this wouldn't be. It's a state of distance that's close and a state of closeness that's distant. You have an energy inside a battery pack, inside the universe, that's of a different reality altogether.
Rather than distant, it could be passive.
Explain?
Well, the energy force comes in active, but when it's in the system, it's passive, but it's there.
I would say this. According to Kabbalah, it definitely needs to be active. There is no passivity that can make all of this happen.
The thing is working, but it's not actively. It's putting out the vibe, the thing, but it's not taking it without taking credit for it.
So it's because it's of a different reality, in essence. Therefore, even as it's working inside, in the closest and most intimate way possible, because it's literally the life stuff of life, because it's from a different realm altogether, not from a planet far away, from a completely different reality. It's nothing versus something, therefore, that's why we're not aware of it. So that's why a human being can live for 120 years and not be aware of source, and just be aware of self. That's how it's possible. Now we also have the possibility to peel back, the layers and recognize where it's coming from. We have the ability to say, aha, I've broken through the layers of concealment and I'm discovering the truth. The truth is that none of this should be here. The only way this is here is because of a source infinitely beyond everything that we know. So we can crack through the facade, peel back the layers, and discover the truth. But you're right, Marnine, you're right that it's possible that this is not only possible, the default setting is hidden. Obfuscation. We're not aware of it by default simply because it's not of this reality. If it was closer, it would be a little bit more obvious. But because it's so beyond, we don't even get what it is. So we just think that this is just powering itself. When we come to the conclusion, we come to this radical conclusion, not we, many people come to the radical conclusion that this exists because it exists. To the point that somebody could say there is no author, there is no architect, there is no designer, there is no creator. And it's a thing that people say. And therefore you have stories like the Rabbi, from centuries ago, who's having a discussion with a friend who's a philosopher, but who doesn't believe in a creator. And they always have these friendly debates and sparring, intellectual sparring matches. One day this fellow walks out of the room where he was in, and he had a poem, the other philosopher, that he had left unfinished. And the rabbi goes ahead and finishes the poem for him. And then takes a little bit of ink from the inkwell, this is back in the day, right? And spills it in the corner of the paper. And the philosopher walks back in, the poet philosopher walks back in, and he notices the finished poem, and he says, Rabbi, that's amazing, you did a great job finishing the poem. And he says, I didn't do it. I spilled the ink, and it just formed the rest of your poem. And he says, you crazy? Are you meshuggah? What do you think I am? Like, what? You're kidding, right? There's no way that you could randomly spill ink and it would produce such a perfect ending to the poem that everything should fit. It's not, first of all, that it should form letters. Second of all, that the letters should make sense into words. Third of all, that it should make sense in the same, to continue the original thought and the same scheme. And it's impossible. The rabbi says, and to you it's possible that all of the intricate maneuverings of the world, that the beautiful architecture of the world should just happen randomly like that, just out of some sort of cosmic mistake. But it's possible because the force that's inside of us is so beyond, it therefore remains hidden. Or its default state is hidden. Until we peel back the layers and discover it. But the point is, it's the greatest paradox of all. The force of existence is radically beyond, but also radically within. Here we go. 24-second paragraph. Such a relationship does not exist in the case of a cause and effect progression, which we know as ila va'al. For the effect remains even after the cause has ceased to exist. For example, it is possible for an emotion to continue to exist after the idea which prompted it has been forgotten. For in essence, the emotion is not newly created. Strictly speaking, the idea is not the cause of the emotion, but rather the instrument which called it forth. Having previously existed, the emotion can now continue to exist even after its reason has been forgotten. Have you ever had a situation where you felt good and you weren't sure why you felt good? That's always a good example, right? Because sometimes it's the opposite, where you feel like foreboding, you feel like negative, and you're not sure why. You're like, what happened? What am I worried about? I forgot. I just feel worried, but I'm not sure why. Oh, that's why. Right, so it's possible to have the feeling without even being aware of the emotion. Sorry, I said the same thing. It's possible to have the feeling, i.e. emotion, without being aware of the idea or the thought that prompted it. Again, that's because it's like the table. Once you've created the table, you don't need the artisan, you don't need the original force. It's sitting, it's created, it's not created, it's repurposed, and it's good. So the same thing is true with ideas and emotions. The ideas spawn the emotions, but the emotions can exist. Once they exist, they're good, they're off and running. Although hidden, a trace of the original concept in fact remains. Okay, So there's some sort of trace, but the bottom line is, for the most part, the emotion continues on its own. In the case of creation ex nihilo, however, because a new entity is being created, again, a new entity which doesn't make sense to exist based on every previous reality, this new entity has come out of nowhere, which is why it's called new. It must therefore constantly be renewed. Only thus will its existence be maintained. All of this is what we said before. Let's jump now into the third paragraph, and this highlights what I mentioned a few moments ago, the paradox. This then is the paradox of creation. There is both a tremendous gap with no similarity or point of comparison between the creation and the creator. So there, on the one hand, there's this massive gap, yet simultaneously, the divine force is constantly present within every individual creation. As it is written, La'olam Hashem devarcha nitza b'shamayim, which is translated as, forever, O Lord, your word stands in the heavens. And as the Kabbalists explain, what does it mean, forever, O Lord, your word stands in the heavens? Your word that said, let there be light, let there be firmament, let there be vegetation, let there be dry land. I went out of order. Whatever. Let there be the birds in the sky and the fish in the sea and the animals and human beings, and let there be rest. God, which God didn't say let there be, but God just rested. But all of the let there be's, those words, La'olam Hashem devarcha nitza b'shamayim, forever, O Lord, your word, the divine utterances that create all of this out of nothingness into somethingness, those creative forces, the letters and the words of creation, that creative code, if you will, of the universe, has to constantly be informing and creating the universe. And if not, it would revert back to nothingness. Just like the baseball falls down to the ground and loses its flight, just like the room becomes darkened once again once the lights are shut, once the force is gone, it reverts back to its state. And its state is not just a dead universe, it's a non-universe. Because the prior state of this was not just a sleeping state. It's not like a universe, like planets that were not functioning until they were plugged in. Oh, now they're rotating and doing all this stuff. Nothing existed. So the default state of this is nothingness. Pull out the power, and it's nothing. Not something that doesn't move, it's nothing. So therefore, the paradox is, to the Creator, creation is the greatest gap ever. Nothing, something, infinite, finite, undefined, defined. It's the unbridgeable gap. On the other hand, that divine force that is way beyond anything we can imagine or anything that is of this sort is intimately enmeshed or interwoven into the fabric of creation itself, actually causing it to exist.
Are you saying that it's the responsibility of beings, humans primarily, to keep those ideas aloft, to understand the words, understand that energy in order to keep it active and present? Is that?
So we hope that even if we don't get the message, God will still be kind to us and keep things plugged in. But it is our job to uncover, to unravel the truth, to uncover the truth, and to perceive beyond. It's really a tall order for us, but thank God that's why we have these teachings. That's why we have Torah. That's why we have Kabbalah. That's why we have all the spiritual teachings to help us perceive beneath the surface and say, this is not here because it's here. Nothing should be here. There's no just because. So this is only here because of. Now, what's the advantage of plugging into truth? Does it mean we get more energy from the source? I don't know. I think that would make it too easy. Like if knowing the truth would automatically fill us with this incredible, energy, then it would almost take away the free choice aspect of it. So it's almost like the more we uncover the truth, things kind of remain the same, almost, other than being more enlightened. But things don't automatically transform in radical ways. I mean, for us they do, internally, and it's again, things have to be balanced. There's more to be said about that, but the idea is God wants us to discover it on our own and not be influenced by other factors. Because if we were influenced, if we were made to know the truth, then we wouldn't have much of a role here.
No free will.
We wouldn't have free will. So why do we need to have free will? That's how God wanted it. Who are we to explain why did God want to create this whole thing from the beginning? Like, what was wrong with just nothingness or whatever that was? There was nothing wrong with it. God chose this, and God chose this to be a realm, this actual planet Earth, to be a realm where human beings have free choice to either perceive the outside or the inside, the surface or the truth, and both ways are valid options. It's not like if a person lives their life denying a source, it's not like they're taken out of existence. Things are sustained. That's the way it is. Yeah.
I think that's the whole purpose is to evolve. That's the plan to choose life. And it's not saying it's better than. It's not like that a ambient being is more important than a stone, but it's a little more interesting.
Definitely more interesting.
And
more room for error also.
Well, yeah, and that's the thing. But to build it in God's image, and so we've got to. Where do you get that? So you have to do search and get outside yourself, and we're imperfect, but it's the journey that counts.
Yeah, I think another thing that's pretty amazing about all of this is that if you want to discover God, right? Let's use the G word, right? If you want to discover God, the source, the creator, where's God? Nowhere else. You don't have to look anywhere else. It's not the journey of 1,000 miles or whatever it is. It's inside everything, every single thing.
Yeah, it would require like a self-notification.
Right.
Basically, because you have to break away everything that is something in order to even perceive that nothingness.
Correct.
So
you can't take the something for granted that this is because it is.
That's why so many people are
nothingness,
using psychedelics now. They're sort of back
right. It's a dissolution. Yeah.
Alter their consciousness in such a way that their being sort of recedes and they are receiving more of that.
You said the right word, Kabbalah, receiver. That's what the whole point of Kabbalah is, that you become a better, like it kind of like temporarily increases your receptivity. You can do the same thing with meditation. It just would take practice.
Right. Yeah, we're not advocating substances.
No,
although I know a guy.
I think that it is worth an experience with it, honestly. I think it's something that a lot of people should try. But,
Listen,
I'm
not going to weigh in on this. I'll just say this is out of my it's out of my expertise. But I will say, that it is the search, the human search for truth. The human search for truth is very powerful. And it's not something that, is born of this generation or, another it's a constant. Because God did, with all of the, the infinite gap and all of the incredible hiding, again, it makes sense why things are hidden, because there's no way to relate to something infinite. It's inside you, but it's still infinite, so you don't even see that it's there because it's so infinite. But there's still something. Some sort of, I don't know, some sort of bug inside of us that says, are you sure? Is this all there is? You're sure about this, right? Nothing else? Are you sure that you're sure? You want to double check? It's like you leave the house. Like, did I lock the door? I think I did. Are you sure that you locked the door? All right. All right. Let's continue. But nowadays you have an app, right? You can have a smart home with locks that you have your phone, you hit an app, and even if you didn't lock it, it's now locked, the lights are out, the air conditioner's off, no big deal, or whatever the heat. Okay, moving along. So this is the paradox. Oh. Did we finish that paragraph? I don't. No, maybe we're. I don't think we finished it because I don't remember focusing on that last sentence. Focusing. Well, let's go back to both of these. Both of these seeming opposites. This is 1, 2, 3, third paragraph. 1, 2, 3, 4 lines from the bottom of that paragraph. Both of these seeming opposites result from the creation ex nihilo, i.e., what are the opposites? That that the source is infinitely distant from the creation, and the source is intimately interwoven within the creation. That's the paradox, and that's in creation. Focusing one's thoughts on this wondrous paradox is one example of how meditation can lead to joy in Avada. Because honestly, if you and I are meditating on this, we should feel so thrilled that we have the infinite source inside of us at every single moment, powering me and all around me. We should be singing and shouting from the rooftops. We should be completely thrilled, and we will be, if we think about this stuff, if we really meditate on this, if we really focus our attention on this, if this is a truth that we hold near our hearts, we will be vitalized and energized in our divine service and be excited about life itself. Life is amazing. Okay. B, point number 2. In the second place, one may meditate on the intrinsic greatness and exaltedness of the Infinite One, whose greatness is unfathomable. Let me explain. Meditation A was meditating on God through the prism, through the lens of creation. Let me look at creation. How does creation happen? It happens something from nothing. Divine force is the source force is infinitely beyond this, but is also intimately inside of this. Now I have this sense of God's wonder and amazement, and now I'm uplifted and excited and joyous and ready to roll. That's all A, but it's seeing God through the process of creation and how that ex nihilo, the yesh me'ayin, works. Meditation number 2 is meditating directly on God, not through the prism, not through the lens of the creative process. So again, in the second place, one may meditate on the intrinsic greatness and exaltedness of the Infinite One, i.e. God, whose greatness is unfathomable. That's a quote from Psalms. No one can fathom God's greatness. When one thinks deeply and intensely about this concept, i.e. the greatness and exaltedness of God, meditating upon it until he grasps it well, this is not an easy meditation. But so it's going to take time. Then he will reach a point where the godly light, in all its greatness and rich exaltedness, shines in a revealed manner, page 25, within his soul. And his soul will rejoice exceedingly. And here he says that this meditation does bring a greater light and energy into the person. This is the joy of the soul in God, its maker. It will cling to godliness with yearning and desire. Again, this is a meditation which he does not elaborate on. He doesn't give us the ideas to think about for this meditation. He describes what it is, kind of in a very general sense. But very generally, this meditation is meditating upon the greatness and exaltedness of Hashem, of God. And that, when a person focuses on that, that will lead to an excitement of the soul, upliftedness of the soul, creating more light, energy, and vitality within the human being. This then describes, in general terms, the avoda that stems from love. Remember, this is all positive. It's all love. See, love is... Let me explain why he says love here. Love conjures up different images in our minds. There's different types of love. But love at its core means attraction. Love at its core means that I feel close and I want to get even closer. That's what love is. Fear is when you're afraid of something, right? You step away from it. Or awe, if something is awesome or whatever, awe-inspiring, again, you typically step away from that and not into that. Whereas when something is, when there's love or the feeling of love, you step into that, you lean into that. So he calls this love because these meditations, both on how creation happens in this impossible way and how God is infinitely distant but also intimately close, and the second meditation on the greatness of Hashem, the greatness of God, all of these stir a desire to get close to God, which is basically, it's a love meditation. Love, i.e., I want to get closer to God. I feel close, I want to get even closer. So let me read that paragraph again, start from the beginning. This then, page 25, describes in general terms the avoda that stems from love and that results in the soul's clinging to God, i.e. getting closer, and it's rejoicing in godliness as one who loves rejoices in the beloved. So just like, and here he he draws the parallel to human relationships. When somebody is in love, they rejoice in the presence of the beloved. So number one, when you're in love, and the subject or the other party, the one who you're in love with, is present, is with you, all you want to do is get closer to them, right? Number one. Number two, when they're not here, it's not like you forget about them. You're thinking about them and thinking about how all you want to do is get close to them or you want them to be here. So the same thing is true. These meditations can, ideally and should, evoke the same response within us toward God, toward Hashem. The sense of closeness and wanting to get closer, but also the sense of, I'm going to start from number 2 first. So I'm going to say number 2 is number 1. Number 1, feeling that God might be distant, but wishing that relationship, wanting to be closer to God. And number 2, sensing God's closeness, because God is the fabric of everything, and wanting to get even closer, i.e. in more openly and revealed, in a more open and revealed connection, relationship. Make sense? Okay, all of this is chapter 12. This is the love meditation, i.e. the closeness to God meditation. Chapter 13 is now completely different. Chapter 13 is the brokenness meditation. And this is what I wrote about in the email. This is what I want to focus on at this point. So I'm going to pass around the text. This is coming from Tanya, the book of Tanya, which is one of the primary works of Jewish mysticism, applied Jewish mysticism. Sure. And this is an excerpt from the beginning of chapter 29 of Tanya. In the middle in the 20s, in the mid to late 20s chapters of Tanya, he talks about how to deal with challenging emotions. Emotions such as fear, anxiety, guilt, shame, etc. Emotions that we would typically construe as being negative. How to deal with negative emotions. In fact, a few months ago we had a course, a 6-week course that was drawing from these chapters of Tanya. We called it, the course was entitled Worrier to Warrior. How to go from a state of worry, anxiety, internal pressures and negativity to a state of positivity and inner wellness. Chapter 29 begins with another challenge that a person might feel inside. And I'll tell you what the challenge is before we read this inside. It's really important to understand what this is addressing. We know, when I say we know, because especially all of you that have been here before in Kabbalah classes, we've talked about this extensively. Kabbalah explains that there is a relationship between mind and heart. That what you think about affects how you feel. And so if you want to start from the other way around, if you want to feel differently, you have to think differently. You can't just change the emotion in the state of emotions. You can't just change the channel on the emotion. You first have to change what you're thinking about. And then when you change what you're thinking about, then you're going to change how you feel. And I've said this many very practical applications. If you're feeling worry, anxiety, whatever it is, so then again, just change what you're thinking, it'll change how you feel. But then in chapter 29, he cites this problem. He says, what happens if you know this formula, and you're trying to work the formula, and it's not working for you? Like, you know that if you're meditating on, let's say, the greatness of God, it should evoke a love or desire for closeness to God in your heart. Like, that's how it should work. Because the mind, what we think about, affects the emotions. But what happens if it's stuck? Think about plumbing, right? Think about plumbing for a second. What's a plumber? What's a plumber? I know I have a very good plumber who's very, very reasonable. You can talk to me after class. What's a plumber? Yeah, you have pipes. Something's supposed to go from one side to the other through this pipe, and it's stuck. So what's the role of the plumber? Get it unstuck. Sometimes we need a plumber. You know why? Because from the head to the heart, what's in between? What's in between? Physically, between the head and the heart? Between the head is the neck. And what's the neck? It's narrow, right? It's like we call it a bottleneck. It's literally a bottleneck. The head is bigger, right? The torso is bigger, but in between you have a narrow, right? Relatively, it's smaller, right? Than the head and the body. You have the neck. So what happens? You can have you could be filled with all of these ideas and meditations, but it may not end up in the heart. See, it should, assuming the pipes are open, even though it's a little bit narrow, but if the pipes are open, what we think about should affect how we feel. We meditate, we study, we think, and we should feel. What happens? A person finds, and no one tells us, no, this is not for someone else to judge anyone else. This is us knowing inside. We're learning, we're studying, we're thinking, we're meditating, but we're not feeling. It's getting stuck. Somehow, it's not going through. So what do? Roto-rooter. I'm kidding. You call the plumber. What's the plumber? Chapter 29 of Tanya. He says there's only one solution. There's only one solution. And it's not going to be pretty. And it's not going to be comfortable. There's only one solution. Here we go. Chapter 29, I entitled it Splintered. There is yet an additional aspect that the Beinanim. Beinanim is the person who struggles with life, i.e. all of us. There is yet another aspect that the Beinanim must... There's yet another aspect that the Beinanim must contend with, that occasionally and even frequently they experience a dullness of the heart. What does it mean, a dullness of the heart? You stop really feeling. And even when you feel, it's kind of like you know that you should feel, but you don't actually feel. You ever have that? You're speaking with somebody, and they tell you that they understand how you feel, but you kind of feel like they're not feeling how you're feeling. They're just saying things, platitudes, whatever. All right, whatever. Or even us, we might say things. A person might say, I love you, but not feel it. They might know it, but not feel it. You know the difference? You might know the emotion, but not feel the emotion.
It's not aspirational.
Yeah. In other words, you know that at this point in the conversation, the right thing to say is, I love you. But you're not actually... So you know it as an intellectual formula. Like here, insert those words. But do I feel it? So it's possible for a person as they go through life to experience a dullness of the heart. I.e. the heart is not... It's still pumping blood through the body, but emotionally, it's a little bit cold, which becomes like a stone, and the person is unable, try as he might, to open his heart to the service of the heart, namely prayer. So he's speaking about this in the context of spiritual emotions, and he says, where is this manifest? It's manifest in what's called Avada Shebelev, service of the heart, which is prayer. You see, prayer is a very tricky thing. Prayer is not about saying a bunch of words in a book, but prayer is really about opening one's heart to speak to the source, to speak to the Creator. And that's a very emotional experience. So a good litmus test to see if a person's heart is open in the way of spirituality is to see how prayer looks. What does prayer look like? Is it heartfelt or is it by rote? So that's one example. Also at times, he is unable to wage war against the evil impulse so as to sanctify himself in the things that are permissible because of the heaviness that is in his heart. So this is another Kabbalistic teaching which says that not only, there's an old Hasidic saying, it's the original is in Yiddish, but I'll say it in English, that which is prohibited, is off the table. And that which is permitted, the question is, do I really need it? Right? Should I really indulge in it even if it's permitted? There's a mitzvah in the Torah. The Torah says, the commandment, it says, what's the verse? Kedoshim tiyu, be holy. It says, be holy. So the commentators say, what does it mean to be holy? It's a very vague instruction. So the Ramban, Nachmanides, says, you know what it means? Kadesh atzmacha b'mutar lach. Sanctify yourself in the realm of the permissible. What does it mean to be holy? It doesn't mean to abstain from things that are prohibited. That's not being holy, that's just staying out of trouble. You know what it means to be holy? It's even in the realm of permissibility. Do you need it? Do you really need it? Just because you can doesn't mean that you should. And of course, it's speaking of material pleasures, indulgent material pleasures. Just because it's kosher doesn't mean we should indulge in it. What's the problem? If it's kosher, what's the problem? So the problem is it represents a focus away from the spiritual and toward instead the materialistic. And
there's also a saying from I don't know where that when you die and you go to heaven and you're being judged, that you're going to be asked, are there any pleasures that you did not partake in?
Yeah.
Meaning that you should have partaken in every pleasure that was there for you.
With every statement, there's always a contrast. Yes, that's the wonderful. You're right. It says in the Talmud or wherever it says it, or maybe Midrash, that when a person passes away, they're going to be judged on every pleasure, every food that they saw that they didn't eat. On the other hand, we have these teachings. So how to balance it? We'll save that for another opportunity. But the core idea here is that the way it works in life is either we're focusing on the spiritual or we're focusing on the material. Now you could blend the two and let's say eat for a higher purpose. Right? So our eating could be, why am I eating? To have the energy to be able to perform my mission on earth. I know that a human being without fuel, right? If I'm not fueled up, I'm going to be lethargic. I mean, human beings can't exist without food, right? I mean, we need that basic fuel. So, therefore, my eating is in order to give me the energy to do all the good things that I need to do. So, that's a way how to transform the physical experience into a spiritual experience. But absent of that meditation, the reality is that the more I train myself toward, the more I point myself toward the material, it's just by the nature of things, the less I am focusing on the spiritual. It's the way it is, right? The more indulgent I am in the material, the less indulgent I'll be, that's the wrong word, but whatever, in the spiritual. It's kind of like that seesaw. Doesn't mean we should neglect our body. I'm not going to the extreme, I'm just saying. So he says over here that how does a person know when their heart is in danger of becoming dull and becoming like stone? Those are the words. So that's the language that he uses. Number one, when our prayer is becoming less heartfelt. And number two, when we find ourselves struggling with keeping our natural impulses in check. Forget about the forbidden impulses, even the permitted impulses. When we find ourselves struggling with that, it means that our heart is in maybe not the best place. I think in general, we know that when when we're going through difficult times emotionally, we might find it more challenging. We might struggle more with impulse control on every level, right? Forget the forbidden stuff, although that might also be included in it. But even permitted stuff, right? It's about how we feel emotionally. When we're more excited, when we're more present, when we're happier, we're more likely to keep our impulses in check. That's at least that's the way he's framing it here. When our heart is dulled or like stone, then we're more likely to slip a little bit over there. So again, the point is not to focus on the problem, but rather, so what's the solution? So here we go, second paragraph. In this case, the advice given in the Holy Zohar, which is the primary work of Kabbalah, is as the president of the Heavenly Academy said in the Gan Eden, in the Garden of Eden. By the way, it's good to be the president in Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden. So this is what's quoted in Zohar. So again, Kabbalah quotes the statement of the president of the Heavenly Academy saying like this: a wooden beam that will not catch fire should be splintered. A body into which the light of the soul does not penetrate should be crushed. Again, let's break this down. First, the example, the analogy. So a wooden beam, you have a big log, and you're trying to light it on fire. So you have your Bic lighter and a big log, and you're holding it to the log, and it's not working. You're like, well, what's wrong? I have wood, and I have fire, and it's not catching, it's not burning. What's the answer? It's too big, right? It's too big, it's too dense, it's whatever. It's like, it's so you have to break it down, you have to splinter it. When you have a little piece of wood, a little matchstick, and similar sizes, progressively bigger and bigger, then you can light those on fire. Those will catch, and then those can spread, and eventually the entire log can catch on fire. But you got to start off. You got to break up. You got to splinter this log. So the president of the Heavenly Academy says, quoted in Zohar, says, "Ayad delay salak be naher mevachenle, gufa delay salak be naher denishmasa mevachenle." It's Aramaic. So a piece of wood, a log, that the fire is not catching on, mevachenle, you have to crush it, you have to break it, to splinter it open. The same thing is true, a body into which the light of the soul does not penetrate. In other words, we're feeding ourselves the right influences. We're studying the right things, but it's still not catching ourselves on fire. Of course, the soul is always on fire. But the body, the heart is not on fire. It's not becoming alive. There's only one solution. You got to break it down. You got to crush, you got to splinter, you got to break it open. The reference to the light of the soul is that the light of the soul and of the intellect in this situation, here's the problem, does not illuminate to such an extent as to prevail over the coarseness of the body. That's the problem. There is a light. There's a strong light, but it's not working. It's not penetrating through the coarseness of the body. Again, it's like a big log, and the fire is not, it's too dense. For although, again, this is the challenge, this is the problem. For although he understands and contemplates in his mind on the greatness of God, for example, right, this is not apprehended and implanted in his mind to a degree that it would enable him to prevail over the coarseness of the heart because of the nature of this coarseness and crassness. In other words, he may understand it. He or she, the person, may have the meditation in the mind, but it's not reaching the heart.
It sounds like, because we were talking about having too much ego. Like when I hear they need to crush the body, that's the same thing as like tamping down the ego.
Take a look at the last paragraph. This is due to the arrogance, exactly what you said, of the klipa. The klipa means the evil force, which exalts itself above the light of the holiness of the divine soul, obscuring and darkening the light thereof. Therefore, again, everything on paper, everything is right. On paper, everything should work. You have the right ideas, the right meditations, the soul is shining, the intellect is shining. On paper, everything should work. You're plugging in all the right stuff, all the right influences. But it's not. But you're not feeling it. You're not alive. You're not feeling it. You're not open. You're not. What's the problem? There's another factor, the X factor here, which is the arrogance of the klipa.
You're guarded.
Yeah,
you're guarded from even goodness. Like, because sometimes when something bad happens to you, like try to protect yourself from getting hurt, and then in essence, like you're kind of like shielding out the good stuff too. Like now nothing can get in. Now you're just like a stone.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's like,
And that might be from fear, or it can come from many different places. And here it's from, habit, yeah. Which again, that's part of why even the permitted indulgences in the Kabbalistic tradition are not ideal, because it's habit forming, pulling us away from. Because the message of that is feeding self, as opposed to focusing on purpose and source. It's basically self or source. Right, self or soul, or self or source. That's really the two sides of the seesaw, if you will. So again, this is due to the arrogance of the klipa, which exalts itself over the light of the holiness of the divine soul, obscuring and darkening the light thereof. Therefore, here's the solution. So that's the problem. Here's the solution. One must crush it and cast it down to the ground. That is to say, by setting aside appointed times. This is very important. For humbling oneself. What does it mean for humbling oneself? Well, we're going to see this in chapter. We're going to go back to our text now, to chapter 13, and see what it means. Basically, I'll give you the short answer, the short explanation. What it means is to be contemplative and introspective, and conjure up and recognize all of our imperfections and how we have a lot to work on, and that breaks, if a person truly is sincere about this process, a person's heart becomes broken and broken open, and that lets the light shine in. The reason why, when there's light, if the light's not shining in, it's because whatever else is there is closed off. That's the klipa, it's closed off, right? It's protected, it's covered, and therefore the light's not penetrating. So what's the solution? Break it open. Break the shell. And how do you break the shell? In this sense, it's breaking the arrogance. It's by recognizing our imperfections. Now, very important that it's at appointed times. Because in Tanya, in the same book, he says that when these feelings of brokenness come to us, you got to push it away like a ninja. Because that's coming from the evil inclination to make you feel bad, to sink you, to make you depressed, and to make you make the next bad choice. So when it's coming to you, it's not kosher. It's not holy. But this is something else. This is doing it to yourself intentionally at appointed times, at set times, right? In moments of introspection, in order to become more real. And otherwise, we might become haughty and protective of self and shielding self, and I'm okay, I don't need to feel, I'm good, I'm this, I'm that, I'm the other. That's coming from a place of ego. And maybe from a place of fear, of needing to feel that we're okay. Whatever it is. But it's coming from a guarded place. It's coming, as you said, it's coming from a place of ego. And the goal here is, if we want to really start feeling, is to break it open. How do you break it open? Very carefully and intentionally. It's like the example that I can give, and we gave in Warrior to Warrior, is surgery. So taking a knife and cutting another human being's chest open is not a good thing, unless you're a doctor in the emergency room and it's a life-saving procedure, right? If you know what you're doing and you have the right tools and it's a sterile environment at the right time in the right place, then it's not only not horrific, it's actually life-saving. So it's all about context. It's all about how we're doing it. So when it comes to us, the feelings of brokenness and lowliness and unworthiness, whatever, not unworthiness. When the negative feelings come toward us about our own deficiencies and whatever, out of nowhere, that's a tactic to bring us down, to make us feel, to have a low self-esteem. And therefore, when we have a low self-esteem, we're more likely to make a negative choice. Because if anyway we're not great, so then it's not a surprise that I'll choose something that's not good. But that's a tactic to keep us down. This is not saying that that's kosher. That's not kosher. That is unkosher. What we're saying here is, take the same tool, but you use it in the right context. To perform a little self-surgery or breaking oneself open at the right time, in the right place, with the right parameters around it, this can be a very powerful and really necessary activity for one's spiritual growth. In other words, to break oneself open, to have a bit of a reality check for ourselves, to know our shortcomings, and to realize that we're not where we need to be, and in that process, we become more open. We become more vulnerable, we become open. This is all about vulnerability, self-vulnerability, realizing our flaws. Now, sometimes life can make us realize that. This is positing that we can do that to ourselves, that we don't need that to happen, right? So life can break us, but who wants that? That's right. We don't want life to break us.
I don't know.
So
it can be useful.
It could be useful, but imagine if we could intentionally do this once a week, maybe a few times a week, to really have our own introspective experiences and break ourselves open, and then we don't need Hashem, we don't need God to break us open because we've already done the work. So the universe doesn't need to do that for us because we're revoking it ourselves. It's like in last week's Torah in the Torah portion that we read yesterday in synagogues around the world, it talks about the olive oil that's used to kindle the menorah in the temple of old, and it says that you need crushed olive oil. You take the olives, you crush them to produce the oil. So the way it's explained in the mystical tradition is there's two ways that olives. So first point is when do olives produce their oil? It's when they're crushed. So it's the process of the pressure that often brings out the best. But why wait for that pressure to come from an external source? If we could be self-crushing olives, wouldn't that be better?
Yeah.
Right? Why should we wait? So the example is brought in Jewish history, and it's connected with the holiday of Purim, which we're going to celebrate tomorrow night. So throughout history, when times have been tough for Jews have banded together and responded in a wonderful way. And then when things are good, we forget. We go after each other, right? I mean, the inertia sets in, or the whatever it is. And unfortunately, we don't see that same drive and dedication. Imagine if we would embrace the notion of the self-crushed olives, or the self-crushing olives, and pressure ourselves to produce that richness of experience, of shared experience, not because of some swastika that was painted on a community center, some, God forbid, or some threat that was phoned into a place. So now suddenly everyone bands together, or God forbid, a shooting or a stabbing in a community somewhere in the U.S. or around the world, and suddenly now everybody's inspired. What if we could inspire ourselves? Wouldn't that be amazing? Wouldn't that be more productive?
Yeah.
Of course. And so that's what we're suggesting here, is that a person not wait for life to crush them, God forbid, for life circumstances to break them open and make them vulnerable and make them introspective and think about priorities and all that stuff, but rather that we should do that intentionally on our own terms, not on our ego's terms, but on our own terms, right? Because then we might just do it to do it and not really mean it, but we should really do it, but on our own terms, in an environment that's healthy and conducive and productive, without the harm of the, without the harm of being crushed and being broken from the outside. That's the ideal. Look, no one. So these are the options in front of us. So let's now jump into chapter 13. Okay, we have a few minutes, literally a few minutes. I want to read a little bit of chapter 13 just to jump into it. Okay, you ready? Page 25, chapter XIII. Sounds like a Super Bowl. The second approach to Avada, to divine service. The first approach was love, and we had the love meditations, i.e. the excitement about God meditations, in chapter 12. The second approach to Avada, to divine service, is one of humility and bitterness, or brokenness, because of one's distance from God. A person following this approach is and he quotes from the Zohar, is a master of accounts, one who analyzes every detail of his thought, speech, and action, evaluating them to discern those which were not directed to God. Not only things that are prohibited, but, like we mentioned in Tanya, but also those that are permitted but are not carried out for the sake of heaven, for they are also evil. So look what he says here. The second approach here is to break oneself open, to become humble, to become broken and open and raw and vulnerable, because one realizes that while they thought they were okay, in fact, there's a big distance between them and where they need to be in their relationship with God. In other words, yeah, of course, like we said in the previous chapter, God is intimately intertwined with the very DNA of our existence. Fine, but are we living that? Are we expressing that in our lives? Are we aware of that? Are we living true to that reality when a person is truly a master of accounts, truly introspective, and really looking into one's behavior and thoughts and words and actions, etc.? Person might come to the conclusion that they're quite distant from where they need to be and quite distant from that close relationship with their Creator. Make sense? Yeah. Similarly, on the positive side, such a person will also critically examine whether his fulfillment of Torah and mitzvot is unsatisfactory. This is really powerful also. It's not just looking at the mistakes that we might have made, and again, this is not if we suddenly feel out of nowhere, if we feel down on ourselves. That's a tactic from the evil inclination. Run from that to the hills. That's not that. This is intentionally doing this to ourselves, i.e., am I really where I need to be? Am I doing things that I shouldn't? And conversely, this paragraph is, the things that I am doing, am I doing them right? The positive things that I am doing, it's like any relationship. What am I doing that's hurting the other? Right? That I might not be aware of. But what am I doing that's hurting the other? Conversely, what am I doing that I think is good, that maybe is not the best? That's maybe I'm not doing it the proper way or the best way that I could be doing it. Again, I'm starting this paragraph again. Similarly, on the positive side, such a person will also critically examine whether his or her fulfillment of Torah and mitzvot is unsatisfactory. For each mitzvah has a specific purpose, and really what this means is kavana. It has a specific intention or meditation or purpose. For example, tefillin, which is the wrapping of the boxes on the arm and the head, tefillin is intended to subjugate one's mind, right? There's two boxes of the tefillin with the scrolls, one that's resting on the head above the brain, and one that's on the left bicep opposite the heart. So the tefillin, the purpose, the kavana, the purpose, the meditation, the intention of tefillin is intended to subjugate one's mind and heart, which is to direct the mind and heart to God alone. Our minds can be all over the place. We can be thinking about all sorts of things, and our emotions can be all over the place. We might love this, we might fear that, and we could be all over the place, and also our minds and hearts might be out of alignment. It's like, somebody's spine, God forbid, if it's going in various directions, it's not a healthy situation, right? We need the spine to be aligned. So too our mind and our heart is ideally meant to be aligned, which means that when we know the truth, we should feel the truth and we should act on the truth. And if we find ourselves knowing what's right and wrong, but feeling a desire for that which is maybe not so right, and maybe doing the things that we shouldn't be doing, so that means that we're a little bit out of alignment. And so the purpose of wrapping tefillin, when we put the tefillin on our arm by our heart, and we put it on our head above our brains, the purpose of tefillin is to then have this opportunity and this physical expression to remind us that this is the time in the morning, before we begin our day, to focus our minds on what's important, to focus our hearts on what's important, and to align our mind and our heart together with each other. Similarly, this is beautiful. The 4 species of the lulav. On the holiday of Sukkot, we take the palm branch, we take the citron, we take the myrtle, and we take the willow. 4 plants, we put them together, we do the old sukkah shake. So that's not through the Vitamax, the Blendtec. Will it blend? That's not that. But similarly, the 4 species of the lulav should direct one towards the concept of unity. That's why we have 4 different plants, each one representing a different type of person. So it's all the meditation of the lulav is all about unity. And the esrog to the service of humility. I love this. Because its name, esrog, is an acronym for the verse, Al Tevayeni Regel Gaiva. Let not the foot of pride come against me. In other words, don't bring me to the footsteps of pride, of gaiva, of arrogance. That is hinted in the name esrog. Aleph, Taf, Reish, Gimel, Al Tevayeni Regel Gaiva is etrog. And what that means is, as we're shaking the lulav and the esrog, we think about unity, and we think about the dangers of arrogance. And by the way, the issue with gaiva, with arrogance, is that it precludes the concept of unity. You can't get along with somebody else if you're full of yourself. It's the way it is. You don't let people in, as we've been discussing throughout this text. Moreover, there is a general intention present in all mitzvot, no matter which they are, whether they're tefillin or the four species of the lulav, esrog, hadas, and rava, right? Whatever mitzvah it is, there's a general kavanah, which is to accept the yoke of heaven. Note chapter 41 of Tanya, which discusses both intentions, both the particular and the general intentions of every mitzvah. And here's the point of all of this, if one does not fulfill mitzvot with the proper intention, but instead performs them coldly as a matter of habit, guess what? His divine service is lacking. And when one realizes this, he will surely feel humble. He's just giving us ammunition for the self-squeeze that's going on here, to be self-squeezed olives, right? How do we break ourselves open? Number 1, think about all the things that we've done that aren't so kosher. And number 2, think about all the things that we thought were okay, that were positive deeds, that maybe we didn't do in the best way. We did it, but we did it to do it. Or we did it because that's what we were doing anyway. Or because everyone else was doing it. Or because that's what I've always done. Or did you really mean it? Now, none of this, by the way, is meant as a criticism for anyone else. He's describing an internal process that we can do to ourselves. This is not ammunition to start judging other human beings around us, saying, hey, what are you not doing? Or when you did that mitzvah, did you really mean it? Did you really have the right intention? Aha, you were lacking. This is not, God forbid, at all intended for anyone else. This is a process for our own selves. And remember, it's not just a process, it's not intended to just kick ourselves. It's not. There's no mitzvah to get down on ourselves. But if we find ourselves cold of heart or stoned of heart, no previous conversations intended, right? If we find ourselves a little bit, cold, stone cold, like a little bit unfeeling and unmoved by the things that we know we should be moved by, then it's a wake-up call. And that call is, you got to break yourself open a little bit. You got to do it to yourself. No one else should do it for you. To yourself. Break yourself open. And this is done, it's done by becoming a master of accounts. Mar de chushbana in the original. It's becoming introspective. Master of accounts means introspective. And I think about, okay, what am I doing? That's not, because we go through life, I think most of us with healthy self-esteem, we go through life and we're okay. We're good people. I'm a good person. We all tell ourselves more or less we're a good person. I'm a good person. I do good things. This is not saying we're not good people. This is saying that if we feel our hearts getting a little bit closed, it's time to really think about what I need to improve about. And that realization of our imperfection has the effect of not only showing us what we still need to do, but it also has the effect of breaking us open, making us feel a little bit more raw, a little bit more vulnerable, a little bit more incomplete, which, as I quoted a few weeks ago, the Kotzker Rebbe says, there's nothing as whole as a broken heart. Because that's how, as Leonard Cohen writes in his song Anthem, there's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. It's when you have those cracks that's how the light pours in. Because without the cracks, if everything's okay, then we're not really feeling. If everything's okay, and we're not feeling vulnerable, we're not feeling raw, we're not feeling that anything's out of place, if everything's perfect, then it means that on some level we're not really feeling and we're not letting the light of the soul come in. We have to have these moments, self-induced introspection and breaking oneself open in order to start feeling. This is where we're going to end it today, and we're going to pick up chapter 13 next Sunday, same bat time, same bat channel, to finish this discussion. And then soon we're going to get back into ego and how ego plays into all this, but that's getting too far ahead. So the two things that I want to mention to recap today's class, chapter 12 and the first part of chapter 13. Number one, you and I have the ability to meditate upon the paradox of creation, how there's an infinitely beyond force that is intimately interwoven into the fabric of our being, and that should evoke a sense of joy and excitement in our lives and toward God, number one. Number two, we also have the ability to do a completely different form of meditation, which is an introspective meditation, which results in becoming more vulnerable and feeling a bit broken and a bit distant from where we really know we ought to be. This is a positive catalyst in spurring our desire to grow, our desire to learn, our desire to connect, but it does so from a place of brokenness. There's a place for both in our lives. Primarily, our focus should always be on the joy and the love. From time to time, we need the broken meditation. It's very important to have both. You should know, I'll conclude with this point. In Tanya, he says, set aside appointed times. In the Hasidic tradition, the appointed time, as some of you may know, we've discussed it in previous classes, the appointed time is by the Tikkun Chatzot prayer, which is the midnight prayer. There's a prayer, midnight prayer that many recite, and many have recited in the past. It's not. I think it's something that in the past a lot of the mystics and spiritual individuals would do, but it's something. It doesn't have to be midnight. The message is that, or the intention behind it is that it's a time of day at night It's a time of the day when the hustle and the bustle of life is a little bit quieted down. Things are a little bit calmer. If there's kids around, the kids are in bed, and we can be introspective. It doesn't have to be midnight. It could be also 9 p.m. or 10 p.m. or 11, whatever it is. But at night might be a good time to do this, to do the more introspective meditation, because during the day we can't afford to feel broken. That's the point. There's too much to do, good things to do, than to have to work this process. Work this process when the day has concluded pretty much, and now you can work this, and then go to sleep at night with that openness, with that vulnerability, and wake up in the morning like a lion ready to take on the day. So this is more of a nighttime experience. Again, you could also do it in the morning. It's fine. Whatever works for the person, but typically it's understood that the daytime is for the actual work, and the night would be for
What does the
kind of
prayer say?
the Tikkun Chatzos. It's a mystical prayer. It's not the bedtime Shema. It's a little bit different than that. It's a mystical. There's like a vidoy. There's like a atonement, a confession for the sins that we've done, for things that we've done wrong. It's in some prayer books.
Yeah.
It's but it's a lot of it is self-reflection. That's really what it is. The intention really is self-reflection.
What's it called?
Tikkun Chatzot. Tikkun means repair. It's repair, correcting. The Chatzot is midnight. Yeah. It's not in there. You can Google it. Whatever. Google knows everything. Reb Google knows all and tells all. All right, so that's it for today. Again, I hesitate to end on the more negative note. It's not negative, but the more moody note. But nonetheless, that's the order in which we did it in. Bottom line is, overwhelmingly, we should feel the joy. But certainly, it's important to also have that other aspect to us as well. Thank you very much for joining me for Kabbalah and contrition.
Thank you.